Hello everyone. Welcome to the LemonBucket podcast. Here today we have Brian Heater and Dario. They're both members of our team, and today we are going to be discussing Cyberpunk. So we're going to be kind of chit chatting about like some of our favorite like pieces of like cyberpunk media and how it's like influenced like the sci-fi genre in general and how it's influenced different parts of our favorite pieces of media and sort of like what we think it got right about the world and what we think it kind of missed. So first off, I just want to ask you guys real quick, what's some of your favorite pieces of cyberpunk media, whether it's like film, books, games, songs. Brian, I'm talking to anybody. Oh, I don't see anything going on in chat yet. To our three viewers in chat. Okay, we're jumping right into it. All right. All right. Yeah. Hold up, Brian. I'm gonna stop you there real fast. I'm having an issue with an audio thing. Give me a second. No, I can hear you. The stream's not catching it. I'm catching the wrong thing. Give me 1 second. Shit, why is this not
And you made it.
working? Can you go ahead and say something, Brian?
Hello.
Okay, there it goes. Sorry, the audio is cutting in and out. Cool, you're good.
So first of all, have you guys heard about this game? I'm excited about it, right? We've talked about this in the past. Yeah.
I've seen like a preview of it, and it looks dope as hell. I'll be forefront. I'm not the biggest fan of um, RPG games, but this game was definitely one of those where I was like, I might get on the hype, and I might buy that game. And yeah, some of the gameplay looks really dope.
Like this right here. I don't know if this is. I think that this is like clip. It's that cinematic stuff. I don't know if it's
Yeah.
actual gameplay. It could
It's
be.
not.
It could be cinematic from the game, which that looks damn good. I mean, the graphics are insane. Like, I really like all of the aesthetic that they're using. Did you guys see the most recent Blade Runner,
20.
Yes.
Yeah. 2049.
the remake? Yeah. Well, sequel,
Yeah.
but uh, what like? How do you think? Like, I'm seeing the aesthetic of this and the aesthetic of that film. And obviously, the aesthetic of the original Blade Runner, which this game has like an insane like homage to pay for like that kind of aesthetic. I mean,
Mhm.
the game, the tabletop was a thing as well, which
Mhm.
I've never actually played that. But that would be very interesting. There wasn't really a question in there, but damn, this footage looks so sick.
Mhm.
So yeah, I guess this is the main character, but I don't think that it's like locked to that, to that face.
Oh yeah,
I'm
because the
pretty
main
damn
character
sure
is the
that
main character you
it's
make.
gonna be customizable. Yeah.
Yeah.
So so you can be whoever you want. And God, that just looks so great. So yeah, this is what I saw.
Yeah. But
I
the
also saw this is I also saw well no there's another one that was where there was a female actually protagonist, which I think was the first thing that I saw. This is at G3 or whatever, right?
yeah.
I think I'm looking at her now. She kind of looks like
Yeah.
Jennifer, the actress. I forget her name.
Jennifer Lawrence?
Yes. Looks like
Yeah.
her a little bit.
Yeah, dude, that's the one that I saw, and they explained it really well. This is like G3 cinematic, and Keanu makes an appearance right there. I love that, dude. It like broke the internet for a couple days.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that was great.
Um,
Yeah. Um,
yeah. So I think the aesthetic is something that we can dive into a little bit about the genre itself and sort of like where that aesthetic came from and like what like it's so iconic and like everyone like that aesthetic is just so ubiquitous, like, especially in like a lot of modern sci-fi's and stuff. And I find it interesting. Like, what do you think draws people to that aesthetic specifically? Like that neon light and grunge sort of like combination. Because like as a sort of preamble, I guess like a lot of sci-fi art back in like the 40s, 50s, and early 60s were a lot of like high concept sci-fi stuff, which like made the future look really bright and really like positive, right? Like even if stuff was like a little bit like had dire situations, like the future and technology was still a good thing. So you look back at like Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek, it has a very positive idea technology. You look back to like the 1950s, sort of like pulp sci-fi stuff, and Space Gordon's running around the universe, saving everything, and flying off in his steel Pegasus machine, and everything looks like so positive and beneficial. But then like you have a lot of like sci-fi authors start to shift in like the 1960s or so, coming out with like Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep from Philip K. Dick or Neuromancer and such, where they start to push this idea of like um, high technology, like low grunge, like high tech lo-fi, and like how the aesthetic is one where you can immediately tell that this is a world where technology has become a bit of a like a trap for people, right? And I'm interested to see like what you guys' thoughts on like why do you think that has become such a large prevalence and such a captivating aesthetic for us in our modern times.
as like a big fan of movies, media, television, recently comic books, video games. A big opening to Blade Runner. I think they did it in both movies, where you just get revealed into this universe that's bigger than anything you've ever seen before. It's like Vegas on steroids in space. It's freaking cool. It's the number one thing I can say about cyberpunk culture. It's always interested me. I'm not here like an expert at cyberpunk culture. I'm really not. Anybody who's ever seen a movie, walked around Japan, Las Vegas, LEDs and cool stuff like that does it for you. Add a little dry smoke in there, and it's going to make any city cool. Um, Watch movies like Total Recall, Blade Runner. That's that movie life, right? It's like, oh, it's a movie. It's like the sewer, the steam's rising up from the sewer. There's poverty, there's violence, but there's a really cool, massive skyscraper with a bunch of like flames and like evil corporations going on. Like you want to watch it, like you're into it. So I think Cyberpunk has always caught my eye like that. Again, not being an eye expert, I'm going to sit here and say I know Cyberpunk culture really well. Every Keanu Reeves movie that has something to do with the briefcase, black suits, and like death and despair, but everybody looks like $1,000,000. Like you're enthralled. You want to watch it. You want to hear that story.
I love that Keanu Reeves made an appearance in that Keanu Reeves thing. Just like when that happened, it made my day. I just got to throw that in there. Really, my whole month, I was like very excited about that. I'm still stoked about. I'm still stoked. So when the movie came out, when the original Blade Runner came out, based on the PKD androids, the do androids dream of what is it called? Do androids dream of sheep
Electric Sheep.
or some of electric sheep? That's right. Okay. Um, which I didn't realize that he actually bought. They bought the title Blade Runner because it was cooler, because it
Yeah.
was a cooler name essentially, and they bought that title. It wasn't even like that.
It wasn't even associated with
Yeah, I mean, I knew that it. I just assumed that Blade Runner was they just created that name.
What's the original one called? What's the original story called?
Do
Do Androids.
androids dream of electric
Yeah,
sheep?
I saw that. Okay, on the video.
And
Yeah.
actually, that author, not to get too much of a tangent, but that author apparently did Westworld, right? No, okay, not Westworld.
That's Michael Crichton.
Oh,
Philip K.
Michael
Dick
Crichton.
did Man in
God,
the High Castle.
okay. Right, Man in the High Castle. That was the one that I didn't know. Man in the High Castle. I was so surprising. Like I literally didn't even know that was a book. I guess I should have paid more attention on the beginning of the intro, right? But I think that the timing of when that movie Blade Runner came out was kind of important, right? 84.
82.
That's 82. Okay, 82. Uh, so that's right in the beginning of the 80s, right? It's kind of like right at the start, in my opinion. Obviously I wasn't alive at 1982, but right at the start of like kind of like commercial and corporate greed. Uh, and I think that it's kind of around the time that it started getting very expensive for people to live, and the cost of living kept going up, but the jobs have remained, or the wages have stayed from there at the same time. Not to make it too political, but actually I think that the like people like kind of feel that, and then they see this right as kind of like a dystopian. This is like dystopian future, right? Like you said earlier, the original sci-fi movies were like totally of the 50s and 60s and stuff. They were like totally the bright future, like, oh, we're going to be exploring the universe and saving humanity. This is not that. This is like, oh, we've messed up. Like, we have this overpopulation of replicants. You got to destroy them. That's like the reality of this. Um, and people don't want to see a character that is a do good. I mean, that's not necessarily true, but like in this circumstance, right? It feels good to have a guy that is a little bit morally ambiguous. You can identify with somebody that he's not sure what to do all the times. You know,
You may
like
want to be
really.
careful with that during this scene.
Oh yeah. Okay. So
So I just thought
eating my
I
words
thought
a
it was
little bit
hilarious
there,
when you
but
started talking about morally ambiguous characters during the rape scene.
oh gosh, he is morally. I forgot that. Oh, I forgot that was a thing in this movie. Oh my gosh, that's something that we kind of have to
So wait, are
address
we
now that
just
it's been
talking
brought
about
up.
the scene, or are we watching one that I'm not looking at right now?
Oh, so if you look at the stream, I've got the trailer running in the background.
Oh, okay, cool. I should go to the stream.
Uh, that was like perfect timing. Yeah, I thought that I
It's
forgot
great
that was
timing.
a thing. And this
Nope, I think
morally ambiguous, like in more ways than one,
then one,
right?
yeah.
Obviously, it's not only morally ambiguous as like what's the right thing to do. Like morally ambiguous as in he often does the wrong thing.
Yeah.
He's a bad cop,
I
so to
I
speak.
think one of the things I think is one of the things that you bring up that I think is pretty interesting. I think it's pretty spot on is like I think there's a big cultural shift in like the 60s, 70s and 80s around people's idea of the future. And I think you hit onto it with the idea of like corporatism and like corporations sort of being the driving force that had like taken over everything, and like the idea that like we would just become, no matter how much technology we get, we are just like subjects to like the corporate takeover in some regard or other. Like every part of your life is going to be commodified and is going to be ruled by these corporations. I think that you're right. In like the 80s is when that really became a predominant feeling and a predominant idea in the zeitgeist. And I just don't think it's left us since then. Ever since basically like the, not again, as you said, not to get political, but ever since like the neoliberal takeover of the Reagan and Thatcher administrations,
It was,
respectively.
yeah, I was gonna say, I didn't want to say, but you said it. It started with
Yeah.
Reagan.
But I
Yeah.
think even beyond the politics of it, like I think culturally, it still had such a large footprint on how we view technology
Oh,
then and how we view
yes.
technology now. Because like that neoliberal hegemony hasn't left us, and like like you can create a clear line between like how companies of the 80s operated and how like Facebook operates now, right? Where nobody has faith in any of the systems, and we all pretty much agree that these systems are just going to be oppressive in some regard or other. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's stuck around so much. It feels like a more accurate depiction of our own lives and an accurate depiction of the world that we live in.
I was gonna say back to the morally ambiguous uh, heroes that we like to follow. They're not didn't really just start in the '80s. That's been around since like westerns and Humphrey Bogart movies.
Yeah,
Favorite Private Eye is always a drunk, right? Like we like when they have flaws.
yeah,
Like we like when they're
but
not
but
like
that
cat.
really wasn't a part of sci-fi actually for a long time. Like if you think back, even back in like as late as '70s and stuff, the big sci-fi stuff we had was like Star Wars, which is not ambiguous, morally ambiguous characters. It's very straightforward. And sure, we had like people such as like, but even back in the '40s and stuff, you had like the original Scarface, and then
I'm
you
not referring
have
to sci-fi movies. I'm just referring to like films and stories that we liked following before
yeah.
Cyberpunk really came.
I think the merging of a lot of like old neo noir films and like kind of gangster films with sci-fi films is really what clicked into there, and that's when you start getting I think way more like morally ambiguous characters.
It really does feel like it's like film noir. I mean, it feels like film noir.
Yeah,
It's like very much in the same realm of. I mean, the main character is like basically a PI. You know, um, it has that dark like that really dark, everything's dark feeling. They're kind of it. I mean, you could argue that there's a fatale, right?
I mean the main character. Well,
Totally.
she's not a femme fatale, but she's presented as one.
She like takes the role as one. Yeah.
Well, usually a femme fatale is like somebody who actually turns out to be a dangerous entity who like works against the main protagonist. So think of like Indiana Jones, the
They're
Nazi
just
lady.
subverting expectations.
Yeah,
And there's a bunch of fatalities in Indiana Jones, right? There's also the Nazi one. Like
Yeah.
I thought you were talking about the most recent one.
Oh, we don't talk about the most recent one.
You didn't make an example of that film.
Oh, you didn't like it?
The Crystal Skulls.
Shia LaBeouf one?
Wait, sorry, what?
Who?
What most recent were you talking about? You're talking about Blade Runner, most recent Blade Runner.
No, Indiana
I
Jones.
thought he was talking about.
Oh, Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, the most recent Blade
Lost
Runner
the
was
thread.
phenomenal.
Lost the
sorry.
thread.
The thread was in a circle anyway. No, the most recent the new Blade Runner I thought did really good. And here's another thing I want to dive into, you guys, with this is first, like I guess I'll just mention the through line of the sort of neo noir detective thing, kind of continuing on in Cyberpunk into the modern era, in which like this is now like one of the few genres that we get a lot of neo noir detective films. So like Altered Carbon is a really good example of a very new series that came out that is very neo noir and cyberpunky, right? Dark Intelligence is a book that is very like neo noir and cyberpunky, and so like I find it interesting that like we don't really get a whole lot of like neo noirish detective films anymore that aren't cyberpunk. And I find it interesting that those two things have kind of tied together and have moved forward in the modern era. And then the other thing I was gonna bring up was the
What about real quick? What about what would you call uh I can't remember what it's called, but Tom Cruise
Minority Report.
Tom yeah, Minority Report. Do you think would you consider that as
I don't think I'd
cyberpunk,
consider
or
that
is that
cyberpunky
so
because it
then
doesn't have the
would
right
that
like
be
aesthetic or
it
whatever,
does
right?
it feel noir, or is that just too sci-fi?
It feels just
Because it does
sci-fi-ish.
have a little okay. It does
I don't
have a
know.
little bit pessimistic outlook of it doesn't have the same aesthetic of art.
It
That's the
definitely does
thing.
not have the same aesthetic. You're
Because
right.
it's a Hollywood movie. I mean, not because it's a Hollywood movie, but because it's a Hollywood movie that is starring Tom Cruise, and that's like not what they're going for.
Can I interject though? Like, well, now while I agree overall, there are some things that stick out to me. Is that cyberpunk world, at least, like when he goes to the guy who has no eyes, gets his fill of drugs. Like, while might not be the neo noir detective thing, is the cyberpunk at least aesthetic there, or were they just cheaply using it in a Hollywood movie?
Ooh,
I
this is a
think
good
maybe
point.
that might be that's kind of an homage. Like it does like, and he, you know what, he does like go around like it does kind of use the film noir, like he is not doing it by the books, right? He's
Yeah.
not
Yeah,
doing it how he would normally do it. He's like, I'm gonna do what I want to do,
and
right?
while
So like,
The kind of
it,
I
while it
think.
did
Go ahead.
Goldberg like lovey happy stuff, there is also the scene where he's like escaping, right, and his own car becomes taken over by the corporations, and he's got to like break out of the car and jump onto the other ones. They show that like fast like freeway of flying cars and like huge skyscrapers and stuff like that, right?
it's really interesting because you don't really get that much of a glimpse into uh, their world all that often. I feel like in that movie because they make it
Minority
so
Report.
much
Yeah.
about so much about the technology that they have, the like future seeing thing.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really do the what like Blade Runner does, where they're setting a what is it called, location Nick, film guy. What is it called? Location something. Location. It's not location establishment, but it's like it's literally when you use like the icons from a city and you're like, here's where you are. Uh
Mm, like
Hitchcock
they're
did
not
it,
use. They don't use like a. Well, they use a lot of establishing shots, but their establishing shots are kind of
but you
vague.
know that you're in. I'm talking about in versus this film does not do this.
Yeah.
Right? You're not getting set up. Maybe I'll eat my words. What's the intro to that film? Isn't it a crime being committed?
I think
It
it
looks
is.
in a
Yeah.
pretty suburban place. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's not the big grandiose entrance of, oh yeah, dude, it's like it is a like a commercial basically.
Well, this isn't the opening scene. This is just a trailer.
Oh, this is a trailer. Oh,
Sorry,
okay, my
I just
bad.
pulled up the trailer. I'm moving
Okay.
fast here.
Yeah,
I was like,
it
it's a
looks like
commercial. Oh my
It is
gosh.
a
the
commercial.
story seems like it protects. It's like you can't flirt with the idea of the corporations dictating how people live their lives in the class systems. When they open, it's very the suburban area that adultery is about to take place, and for the most part, it's happy. And then technology flies in and stops it. There are other scenes in this movie that show you not so much of like happy places, like when he's running from the guards, like he breaks into families' homes, like with the jetpack on, and like definitely see that life there, right? That kind of like gritty, like kind of grungy, not dystopian, as you mentioned earlier.
Hmm.
But I would agree with what you guys said earlier, though. There's like big sprinkles of it, maybe, versus
Yeah,
like
I
it
think
being a true cyberpunk setting.
I think this gets into a good conversation because this film does actually use some of the cyberpunkish, like
Like, look at
themes.
that freeway shot right there. The freeway shot.
And this is what I was talking about here, breaking into the families' homes like that. And it's like there's
But
definitely
the
lower.
freeway shot uses cars that are futuristic,
Yeah. Well, I mean,
right? Like
yeah.
think of like the cars, but not like that. Like the cars that are in Blade Runner, they are futuristic, but they do not look like that. That is they're like rounded, that looks like a pleasant future car,
That
like
looks Apple made a car.
yeah, like Apple made a car or like
And
Google made a car.
here's an interesting
And like,
conversation point. I think we can dive into if you don't mind me interrupting a little bit. I
yeah,
think Minority Report does use some cyberpunk themes, but it definitely does not use cyberpunk aesthetic, right? And I guess this comes into question is like, what is cyberpunk just the aesthetic, or is cyberpunk a set of themes that get explored as well, or is it
That's
just
what
the
I'm curious.
aesthetic?
I think that it's the theme. Here's the thing is that like people will just like you can type in probably cyberpunk gaming music and you're just gonna find a bunch of like
Synthwave,
synthwave, right?
yeah.
So like there's this big kind of like generic, not generic, but a big pool of stuff that kind of gets labeled as cyberpunk vibe, and I think that vaporwave sometimes people try to throw that in there, the kind
Mhm.
of that kind of thing. I think that cyberpunk, like as an aesthetic, really sticks out because it really the important thing is, in my opinion, is like the rebellion against like corporatism and like the kind of effect that the negative effect that corporatism has on humanity. That's kind of like one of the big themes.
Okay.
Right, and like the aesthetic of all the lights and stuff, like that is part of it, but it's almost a result of that corporatism and the advertising's getting bigger, 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 lights getting bigger, bigger, bigger. So like that, it does become a part of it, the neon lights and stuff like that, but it is more of a result of that corporate greed and like the effect that it has on humanity, I think.
So you think the okay, so this might be an interesting rabbit hole to go down. So your point is that you think it's more about the rebellion against corporatism, and I think Minority Report does a little bit of that, but I don't think that's its main focus. But
I think at the heart of it, that's what it's about. Obviously, you could argue that, it's not going to strike the same chords without all of the specific things being hit.
Well, I guess
It,
because
I
for Minority Report, for me, it's not about like the against the corporation. It's about against like the government and the state because it's the police department, and it's not like corporations are taking over the police department. It's just the police department's system that they are using is wrong. Their idea of pre-crime is wrong and somewhat immoral, right? It's not like the
yeah.
corporations. It's not like RoboCop where the corporations are forcing the government to use this technology. The government's just using this technology.
And also another thing is in that specific film, it's really about it ends up being about one person, right? One person's wrong thing. If you think about it, it's not really subjecting an entire
Yeah,
system,
to the
right?
scrutiny.
It's not making critique on an entire system. It's like this dude made it, and then it's like, and we changed the system. It was wrong, and
For this
finally
one guy.
everybody
Yeah.
realized, and there's a resolve to it. Um, it's not like there's a resolve in like with the world, in any of the cyberpunk aesthetic, things that we've seen,
Yeah,
right? There
like
is
Blade
never
Runner
a
doesn't have a
resolve to the
resolve.
world. Like the point, that's not the point. You
Yeah.
don't beat
You,
corporatism. The point is actually that you can't really, and that you fight against it, and you know, that's what I think. Uh, but maybe my opinions are making me jaded, and I'm reading into it a little bit
no,
too
I think
much.
I think you're kind of right though, because I think in most cyberpunky stuff, like the main character might win the battle, but it's definitely clear that they've lost the war, right? Like there's no winning against the system. RoboCop has that same aesthetic. Blade Runner One and Blade Runner Two have that same aesthetic, or that same like thematic twist. Um, but I wanna draw back real fast to the conversation around aesthetic because you said something interesting that I think we can play with a little bit, and I'd be curious to get both of your thoughts on this. So you originally talked about how you think cyberpunk at its core is a genre meant to thematically discuss corporatism. And the neon lights and the high contrast grunginess and everything is really just a aesthetic way of bringing people into that idea of corporate takeover. I'm curious to get your thoughts if you could make a story that had the same sort of like themes of like anti-corporatism, but instead of having the like high neon, high contrast neon grungy lights, had more of like a Apple aesthetic, right? It had like everything is glossy and nice and clean. The aesthetic is very like like retro futurism, like everything looks just so beautiful, but the story and the themes themselves still explore this idea of corporate takeover and glossing over the grunginess of the world with this like hi-fi technology. Do you
Well,
think
it's
that would
uh,
still fall under cyberpunk if it didn't have the neon lights and it looked more like an Apple store?
I have some thoughts, but we haven't heard from Dario for a
I go
while.
back to saying like that's what's going to give you things like Minority Report and like a lot of the stuff I see in Black Mirror. Like it seems
Okay.
as though that type of technology has like stepped into the realm now, and everyone accepts it. It's fucked. The government can watch everything from your eyes. There's a weird technology out there and scary people. It's not, flame going up, spaceships, stuff like that. That would be what I would kind of, what I, what I've seen out there and what I like, what's acceptable to me. It seems like what Cyberpunk would go to college and get a job would be like.
Okay, so would you guys consider them Black Mirror or things like that still cyberpunk, or are they still something else?
Now you're leaving the
I
genre then.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting because it does have, some of the themes, but you kind of said the Apple thing, and it makes me think of. I kind of had the thought like Cyberpunk aesthetic knows that it's gritty, and it doesn't try to hide it, right? It doesn't hide the fact that the streets are like run down and like there's crime, and like it's knowledgeable of that, right? But
Yeah.
like the way that corporatism really works, um it seems that it seems like the like with Black Mirror, right, is like try to hide it. Like we don't want to look at the negative stuff, right? um Corporate, they're trying to paint, it's like you're trying to paint a rosy picture type of thing. So it's like almost like the cyberpunk aesthetic is aware of its grittiness and the of like how bad things are, right? And doesn't try to hide it and doesn't shy away from it. And the the Apple, like you said, Apple, not you saying Apple is like not talking shit about Apple, but like that aesthetic, right? The kind of other side of that dystopian future where it's like corporations are positive and but they fuck you, essentially.
Yeah,
uh
like it looks nice, but it still fucks you.
it looks nice but it still fucks you, yeah. Which
Which is basically
have
Black
you
Mirror.
have you, yeah, well, basically Black Mirror. Have either of you seen the Amazon Prime show, uh oh gosh, I'm just gonna drive me crazy. I gotta look it up right now. Yeah, it just came
Upload,
out. It's essentially what'd you say?
upload.
Yeah, Upload. Have you guys seen
Oh yeah,
Upload?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know. Yeah, it's like Apple. It's cookie cutter. It still show you the
Yeah.
real world, right, where the girls work out in the call center. But yeah, you're getting away from that aesthetic, right? You're getting away from that look of like silence, despair, and I think you put it perfectly. The dystopian, right?
even
I
though
think
it's
that's a key
still
element.
dystopian,
Still is dystopian, but it's not
it just doesn't
acknowledged.
look like it.
And
Yeah.
yeah, people are trying really hard to hide it, or like people don't realize it. It's kind of
Yeah,
like that,
that's right. Yeah.
right? it's
That's
kind of
actually
it's kind of interesting.
that's actually really interesting. Okay, so let me pick your guys' brain here for a little bit. So back in like the 1980s and 90s, and some regard 70s, we had a lot of like sci-fi that had this very like cyberpunky, very like grungy. The streets are dirty and full of crime, and that's dystopia. Dystopia is when the streets are dirty and full of crime. Where if you look at a lot of
Yeah.
like modernist sci-fi, it's like the streets are clean, but the world is still awful. Like the world is still against you. Like Upload's a good example of this. Like the world clearly is still broken for all of the people who are stuck down at the low bandwidth section. I forget what it's called.
Yeah.
Um, life is
The
still
2 gigs.
terrible. The 2 gigs, yeah. Life is still
Yeah.
awful for them, but it's hidden in this sort of glossy clinical veneer. Why do you think that change culturally has happened? Like if you look at like Blade Runner and RoboCop and films from that ilk, and then you look at like modern sci-fi's, like there does seem to be a vast shift in how we approach those. Why do you think that is?
Because the future is here, man.
I'm gonna hate to like call guys out on this, but I think it's because like we're aiming it at both sexes now. Blade Runner, I'm sure there's plenty of like female cyberpunk like fans out there, but I feel that more goes towards that guy who plays video games and likes Harrison Ford jumping off of rooftops and fighting people. I think it's more of like a psychological thing now. The guy who made Upload, I'm pretty sure also made like Parks and Rec and Office and stuff like that. It wants more of a broader audience, is why they're cleaning it up, if you will. And I wanted to ask you, like, I know that in the lower bandwidth level, life seems shitty. Would we also argue for people that are alive and live in the life that our main character lives in before he dies? that also shitty dystopian? Life is awful, but everything's cleaned up.
In the real world, it definitely feels like a Black Mirror episode. Like
Yeah.
life seems clean and nice, but it still is definitely broken. Like people's humanity is gone. Like when you look, whenever he interacts with his girlfriend, or whenever his friends interact with him after he's dead, like their connections aren't there. Their connections are completely gone and broken. And when he talks to his friend, his best friend, who he made the partnership with, like it's clear that his best friend is just struggling to make shit work, right? Like it's like the system isn't working for anybody, but it looks like it is. Like it looks glossy and beautiful. I would posit that I think one of the reasons why we had that shift is that during the 80s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, we had the increased crime wave. And this is something we talked about a little bit last time, Brian, when it comes to Pruitt ego, where like that was the idea of lo-fi, or that was the idea of like the problems in modern society were these idea of street level crimes, right? Things that like Pruitt ego was a great example of this, of like here is a project where like on the street there's dope being sold and everything, and like the systems all run down and life was just grittier, where I think maybe more in the modern times like life does feel more clean to us, but we can all sense that there is, again, like Facebook looks clean and great and everything, but we all know that behind there is just awful shit happening, right? I think maybe that might be one of the reasons why we shifted from like the grimy aesthetic to a cleaner aesthetic, but still
Yeah.
dystopian.
And if you think about it, the 80s were all about, the war on drugs and like cleaning up the streets, So like that aesthetic kind of made sense. Um
Yeah.
like kind of like painting the future in this kind of uh like everything you see is is on like all the crime is on the streets, like everything that you see is gritty, everything that you see, there's nothing that's like clean. I think that if you go inside the corporate buildings, they're clean, if I remember.
So I'm curious, like, what
But
what desensitized us more? Because in my opinion, war on drugs isn't lasted, and our president's not saying it anymore. But what desensitizes us more to what our modern society looks like today? The fact that Blade Runner style films aren't made as often anymore, Cyberpunk films aren't made anymore, or the fact that they've cleaned it up and moved to this, um, as we mentioned, dystopian, but without showing the crime and the despair and the homeless. Because if you look outside right now, like in most urban cities, the homeless problem is worse than it's ever been, and you're more of us are desensitized to the problem and kind of ignore it and just live and deal with it. Almost like those
Yeah.
movies. Something, in the future things are going to look like this. It's going to be so much more fucked.
Yeah, that is interesting because like I agree with you. Like in urban areas, we do have more homeless and stuff, but we don't have the same kind of like aesthetic of Pruitt ego, or the aesthetic of like the Bronx or Hell's Kitchen or whatnot. Like those things are kind of gone. And so I think the aesthetic has changed, but I don't think, I actually kind of agree with you on that. I don't think we've come up with a good like sci-fi language for urban blight in the 21st century. I think we pull from those aesthetics from the 1980s and 90s, and then in the modern times we talk about how like your cell phone is going to end up being the thing that kills you, but we don't talk about the fact that there's a homeless guy down the there's a home. I mean, you go down to Civic Center right now, it's a homeless camp. Like the entire Civic Center is a homeless camp, which it's great that they're not kicking them out anymore, but like we're not addressing that issue, and I don't think we have a. I don't know. Do you guys think has there been a good modern language in cinema and art for that, in the sci-fi sense?
certainly not in the sci-fi sense. I don't really think that there's been a really critical thinking about. I mean, I'm sure people have done critical, but there hasn't a critical thinking about it. But there hasn't been a public critical thinking on that. You know, like there's a public wokeness going on right now with the Black Lives Matter movement. You know, and I think that everybody can kind of agree that that's a cultural shift that is happening right now for the positive. You know, and like I don't think that we've seen something like that happen with like homeless people. I know that I'm talking about homeless people specifically now, uh but
or like modern
just we're just kind
urban blight.
like I don't think that we have addressed it, one thing, in our society. And so I don't think that there has been many films that have kind of tried to create something that's different outside of, or you know, shows that have tried to create something that's much different outside of the, you know, it's either like entirely within the cyberpunk genre, right? And it's living in that, or it's kind of what we were talking about before, this amorphous, I guess what reality is, except for maybe a little bit even more cleaned up.
Yeah.
Um, so but
I don't.
it's not really making that much commentary different, like in a different way, because it actually is just what we are living, right?
Yeah, any
Yeah.
Some
cyberpunk
sense.
that I think of that I've seen recently that I liked was taken from an old story. You know, like I think Alita, probably the most recent thing I've seen in theaters. And that's from an
Actually,
old anime.
yeah.
Battle Angel.
Yeah.
We didn't even talk about that. Yeah.
Alita, I think I take back what I said before. That's a great point, Daria. I think Alita Battle Angel did do a really good job of. It was still cyberpunky because it pulls from the original Alita of the 1980s, but
Yeah, from an old
it's
story, though. Yeah.
but it still had an interesting aesthetic that I don't feel like was cyberpunky. It felt like it did feel like it dealt with like modern blight in an interesting way. Okay.
I would, I would throw it in cyberpunky still, though. I mean, again, for me, being like a novice, right? Just like when a film opens and the city's just huge and there's a
Yeah.
lot of trash, Ready Player One kind of feel, and like
Yeah,
you know
yeah,
he's
yeah,
picking her
yeah, yeah.
pieces up, like the A of the A, B, and C's, if you will, is there of cyberpunk. But again, I'm here to kind of learn and get on to
Actually,
the full theme. Makes
no,
up
I think
cyberpunk.
I think you're right. Now that I go ahead and rethink the Alita, yeah, it does have this sort of like mix of like really grimy, down to earth trash vibe, but it also has like it feels like also like it was like in a European kind of city too. Like it felt like it had like some like character and culture to it.
True. Yeah.
And maybe that's just because it was Christoph Waltz was was the second character in it.
Well, also, Robert Rodriguez loves to take
Yeah,
kind of his culture, put it in the Aztec kind of
yeah.
cops that they have there. I loved it. I love when he does this stuff.
No, I thought Alita was really good. I thought it did a really good job. Okay, so here's another topic I'll shift us to, because I think Cyberpunk did a really interesting thing in which I feel like it became pretty trans ubiquitous across a lot of different cultures and a lot of different places, kind of at the same time. So like you had like the 1980s was full of a bunch of like cyberpunk films, you know, Blade Runner and stuff over in the in the Western world. But then we also had a ton of like very similar aesthetics and a very similar like themes coming out of like Japan and the Eastern world too. So you have Akira, you have Alita Battle Angel, you have uh, uh, help me out here, guys. No, okay.
Akira.
Yeah, Akira, Alita Battle Angel. You had some of like the Hong Kong films that started playing with us again. Why do you think that? And it happened kind of at the same time. Is right in that '80s with that same like uh, 5-10 year period. Why do you think that aesthetic became so popular across the gamut of cultures.
My quick again, just like having an appreciation for it is
Yeah,
just it looks cool. Great openings, films look great in the dark. It's not. It's for me. It's not rainbows and big grassy fields. It's about trench coats and big guns and fast cars and fatales and again like just that steam coming up from the sewer. I'm always like, whoa, what's gonna happen here? Uh, it's not, sorry to get off the Japanese direction, but that show that we love on Netflix, X, Love and Robots, I think it is.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
Sexual Robots,
Sex,
yeah.
drugs, and yeah.
They do some cool things. My favorite episode in that is that Zima Blue one.
Oh
They
yeah,
give
yeah.
you his background, kind of creating his body again. He goes into that dark city. Man, I just love that stuff. Total Recall, like that to me is that, again, probably just an aesthetic, but as a novice, if you tell me to point at Cyberpunk, I know I point at those guys. Quick side question before we get back to Japan. Back to the Future 2. Would we call the future? Would we call that the cyberpunk aesthetic? Absolutely not. Probably doesn't have the theme.
Probably not.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Cars,
I don't know. Brian?
like
That was the 80s in the future. That's what it felt like to me. It's the 80s in the future.
Yeah. Actually, I think you're right on that. I feel like it was just the 80s in the future because I don't feel that I don't feel that Back to the Future 2 part 2 has that same sort of like grimy aesthetic, but it still definitely has some like 80s feel, and I feel like so much of Cyberpunk has that 80s just feel built into it. Even though it didn't start off in the 80s, start off in the 60s with, Philip K. Dick and then Neuromancer in the 1970s. But
the aesthetic,
the
like
aesthetic
visual aesthetic for it was developed in the 80s.
in the 80s, yeah.
Because
it's so like that film, Hollywood films that try and miss to make cyberpunk films are kind of this other little genre they've carved out for dystopian alternate realities or universes.
I almost don't think it's tried and missed. It's probably more like those films are definitely inspired. Maybe the director wants to do more. I'm not. You know how like Hollywood stuff happens. It's like they have produced, like the producers are gonna squash that down if they don't think it's a good idea. Especially at and it's like tricky timing for sure, and depending on the studio, like. I mean, great example is that film that we were talking about. What is this? The preview? Oh, it is Back to the Future. I mean, the interesting thing is that Back to the Future did have the DeLorean, right? Which totally feels like a cyberpunk aesthetic. Like,
dude, just look at the Cybertruck nowadays. Like,
yeah.
I mean, like, I remember the scene where they go and they lose the girlfriend. The cops have to pick her up like that. Look at the spray paint on the wall. Cool hat, like danger. To me, it's a little bit there.
Yeah, but it's not film noir. Like, it doesn't feel dark.
but I don't feel like Cyberpunk needs to be film noir though. But
well,
I
know
it
doesn't need to be film noir, but it doesn't feel dark. It doesn't feel dark,
Yeah,
right? Like, how often is it daytime in like Cyberpunk, like aesthetic, and like even if it is daytime, like the lighting will not look like it because the smoggy city. Okay, right there, yeah.
About that. Like, everyone's comparing Biff to like Trump, like is what that's gonna be like. It's so funny. Like, that's pretty dark, pretty dangerous, violence, gone a certain way.
It certainly doesn't capture the same aesthetic, but it does look, the same feelings are there for sure. Kind of
I
hits
don't
a
know
few
if
of
the
the
same
same notes.
feelings are there. Like I feel like it
You
uses
don't
some
think
of the
so?
same like I don't know.
It's
I
like
don't
a
think
cheap trick.
so. Yeah. I mean,
It's
it's
not really a
Robert
cheap trick,
Zemeckis.
but it's
Like, it's
yeah.
Robert Zemeckis. Like, he's never gonna do like a
It is what
deep
it
like.
is. Yeah.
It is, but here's the thing that I find so interesting is that the aesthetic is still there are still points of the aesthetic are there. The DeLorean, the way that the skateboards operate, the way that the parts of the I don't know,
Yeah.
like there's still
It's like
elements that are still there that you could tie
they're
easily
cherry
to.
picking. It feels
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
just
And I
cherry
don't know if
picking.
I don't think they're cherry picking because of Cyberpunk. I think they're just cherry picking because that's what the future in the 80s looked like, right? But if you look at that and you compare like their clothing style to the clothing style in like Cyberpunk 2077, like, oh, it's just the 80s. And I
Yeah.
find that interesting. That like a port a portion of an entire genre is just the stylings of a decade.
Another '80s one for you that I want to know which side of the category it falls under. Howard the Duck. Would you argue that that's got some cyberpunk aesthetics or theme to it?
I don't think I could argue that one. You're on your own for that one.
Okay, okay. So maybe we should
I will
discuss some
play
of
the
the ones
trailer
that.
just for the sake of our audience, but you're on your own for that one.
No, I'm not arguing that it is. I'm asking.
But I do kind of want to take one more step back and sort of talk about the while this is playing in the background, want to talk about the aesthetic of like we talked about Alita, Battle Angel, and stuff, but I want to sort of dig into like why did Cyberpunk more or less happen at the same time in both Japan and the U.S. And like what do you think like and then like so much of like modern Cyberpunk is this idea of like so much of the aesthetic is like Japanese or Chinese or Hong Kong signs and stuff in the background and everything like it has that sort of
Yeah.
same like pan Pacific feeling to it. Why do you think that is? Or like have you guys like do you have any thoughts on that?
I'd simply say that just people follow Hollywood's lead. What is Hollywood in Japan? Probably picked it up from there. That's my guess.
But like okay, so but I would say like so if we look at the like if you remember like back in like the 1982 we've got Blade Runner and Blade Runner has an aesthetic that is very Japanese. We have the Japanese geisha.
Could be the fetishization. That's a hard word to say. Of
Fetishization.
yeah, of Asian culture,
Yeah, but like
specifically
why specifically Cyberpunk to
Japanese.
pick up on that?
Well, I think that for one thing, Tokyo at the time was a great example of a very, very um, advanced, what you would call like advanced, like architecturally. They've been like very futuristic for a long time, right? They've been very over that. Like that's the most cyberpunk city in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of makes sense that that aesthetic would be grabbed from that. That there are heavy aspects of that, you know. But I also do kind of think it's the fetishization a little bit. Um, but but it is like during that time in the 80s, like that was the Tokyo was that city, right? I remember like thinking that when I mean thinking that as a little kid growing up in the United States, you know, thinking Tokyo as a huge city, this like where they just had huge buildings and everything was futuristic. Like that was my thoughts, even as a little kid, like not really knowing anything about the world, you know. So I think that has something to do with it. But maybe, you know, but I
just
don't
the
know.
idea
I'm not very.
of
I don't know like the Pan Pacific influence like you said. Like I don't know if there's more than just like a fetishization of it. Like I don't. I'm not like versed in that, so I'm not sure.
Sounds like it makes sense to me though.
I don't know. Definitely, there's definitely been like a lot of like. Didn't Netflix make one of those old like kind of cyberpunky uh like they remade something recently. They definitely remade a bunch of Japanese like anime shows, right? Recently.
remade.
Not
So
remade, but like just
yeah, put them on the.
use the premise. Yeah, use the premise.
Oh,
Yeah.
What is this?
It's just
Oh, no.
cyberpunk influenced by Japanese culture video. I just
I
thought
was
it
gonna
was
say
a
for
visual.
me and the audience,
Ah,
what
see, I knew that somebody would have already done the hard work on it.
what are some other ones so I can kind of do some homework, like other than Akira, um, some other good Japanese.
Ghost in the Shell, the originals.
Oh yeah,
Ghost in the
that's
Shell
great. We didn't
pulls a
even talk
ton
about
from
any of that.
Neuromancer, actually. Ghost in the Shell pulls a
Mm.
shit ton from Neuromancer. Yeah.
Any guesses why Hollywood anime hasn't touched Neuromancer? Hasn't made it something?
I think it was just a really hard film to, because it's long, and so I think it was really hard to condense. And then I think by the time people started to figure it out, the ideas were already ported over to 100 different things. Again, The Matrix did a ton of work, basically riffing off of Neuromancer. Not ripping off, riffing. Like the ideas were utilized, and so like a lot of times if you have an old piece of sci-fi that is like really old and doesn't get adapted pretty quickly, those ideas will get plugged into the just the zeitgeist, and like
Yeah.
10 years later you'll just find like, oh, it feels the same as these 10 other films I've seen, because like they use the aesthetic or the ideas from the book.
See,
So
Fifth Element on that Cyberpunk
actually,
theme.
I think,
What
yeah,
was that?
Fifth Element,
Fifth Element.
Luc
Oh, Fifth
Besson.
Element. Yeah.
Love that movie.
Yeah, that's something that we didn't talk about as well. It
I
kind
do.
of has. It feels more like it's a mix of space though, with that
Yeah.
one, right? So
Actually,
it kind of has a weird.
Not a true cyberpunk film. Just
the the
sprinkles there.
Fifth Element feels to me like it's halfway between the aesthetic of New York and everything feels very cyberpunky, but then the like so much of the other film feels like a Flash Gordon film, right? It feels very flashy. It's very like, hey, here's a hero. He's running through these aliens to save the day. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Have you guys
Like
seen
more
like
lighthearted.
have you guys seen
I
Flash
watched that.
Gordon?
No.
Okay. Oh, never mind.
Is it any good?
It is different. Did you ever see did you ever see the Masters of the Universe movie? No?
Can you throw it up?
Uh Actually, let me just throw up Flash Gordon. There's no need to do this end around. So Flash Gordon has a very like hero saves the universe vibe and aesthetic to it that I feel like fits sort of with um, a lot of the Fifth Element. I feel like the Fifth Element does pull like from a lot more grimy kind of aesthetic with like the New York stuff and everything, but I still feel like Bruce Willis's character, he's just a hero saving the universe, especially when it gets to, like the opera scene and everything.
Yeah, but then what about the scene where like the guy comes to his house and tries to rob him, and he takes his gun from him?
Well, that's what I mean. Like, it's like a good, it's like a weird mix because I feel like half of it is like cyberpunky, half of it feels like very grounded and like, you know, um, very grounded and grungy, and then the other half feels very like fantasy sci-fi, right?
This is such a hard thing to pull off. Like this was obviously at the time. It's like, but like, it's like just the right amount of camp and
Looks like the Wizard of Oz to me.
like I don't know, like it was this like to me this is like one of those it feels campy, but I think
It's
it's
very
serious,
campy.
right?
It's
Like
very
oh, it is
campy.
campy. Okay,
Yeah.
see that's what I'm talking about. Like these films are so hard to make because it's so challenging to like have like the bridge of like or like kind of like balance in between being like just like not funny and like slash cheesy and like being hilarious.
Hmm.
Uh,
Oh, masters.
So just so you
it's
know,
not.
this is
It's
originally, just as a sidebar, originally George Lucas wanted to make this film, and then he couldn't get the rights for it. That's why he made Star Wars.
uh,
Wow.
He wanted to do a remake of this film.
Swing and a miss, but in turn a grand slam.
gonna have to go watch this movie.
Okay.
But like
That's what's
like
happening.
you could see how like the opera house and stuff here feels like a similar, like I don't know, it feels like a similar aesthetic to part like half of uh of Fifth Element, but then the other half of Fifth Element does feel very cyberpunky, or it feels like
Yeah.
grungy.
Okay, I got one for you. Morally ambiguous, future, time and despair, evil corporations, Mandalorian show. All that? Cyberpunky at all? Or I don't know.
Hmm. That reminds me more of like an Akira Kurosawa film. Like it's like Seven Samurai or Ronin,
Okay.
right? Although, I mean, it probably is like it probably. Here's the other thing too, like we discussed before, like everything feels influenced by Cyberpunk after Cyberpunk hit, right? Like everything feels a bit corporatist or a bit dystopian, and everything feels like it has this sort of like all sci-fi's seem to have this sort of like aesthetic that they take from inside of it. So there's plenty of like interesting bar scenes and stuff that have the neon lights and whatnot in the Mandalorian. But
It's
what
not
I
so
call the
much
Mandalorian a cyberpunk film, I don't know. This is why cyberpunk has become so nebulous. Like I don't, it's hard to pinpoint it. Like what is it? Is it just the aesthetic, or is it like the ideas behind the aesthetic, and has it just been molded into every other film? I don't know. That's a hard one. Because you could argue that it would be like a combination of like fantasy sci-fi, Akira Kurosawa samurai films, and then Cyberpunk, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a hard one.
It's
Have you seen? Speaking of your cat, there's a new PlayStation game
oh yeah,
coming out.
Cyberpunk cat game.
It looks cyberpunky to me.
It
At least
is.
looks like
It is. Yeah, I'm not kidding, man. It's a Cyberpunk cat game.
Wait, what are we talking about here?
I can't. Yeah, I
Stray
can't believe I
Cat
didn't think of
for
it.
PlayStation 5.
What are you guys talking about so I can pull it up?
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, what is it called again?
Stray. It might be called Stray Cat, but it's a new game on PlayStation 5.
Yeah, just look up cat. Here, let me find it for you.
I'll be right back, guys.
No, that's right.
PS5. Yeah.
I got it.
Oh, you got it. Yeah, Stray. Yeah, I actually saw this. I heard about this game a long time ago, as a game, just like on some blog, and they were basically just saying like, "Watch out for this game," you know. And now it's very hyped up right now, and it looks.
Wait,
freaking
was that
cool.
by wait, is that by the same fucking studio? Annapolis? No?
Annapurna is what it said.
No, is it Annapurna?
Annapurna. Oh, R.I.P. humans. Oh,
But it
all
had the same
humans
logo
dead?
as that film studio that does like it did like Last Black Man in San Francisco, and I want to say it also did oh fuck. Sorry to bother you.
Hmm. Yeah, what is following the cat around? Yeah, there's no humans.
It's all robots.
It's all robots. Oh my gosh. There was something following him around, but there's not now. I love this, dude.
I don't
Dude,
even know what this
it makes
gameplay
me
would
think
be.
of. I know, right? It really makes me think of the
Oh, yeah.
Island of Dogs.
I don't know what.
Island of Dogs.
Oh yeah, yeah. I love dogs.
Isle of Dogs. Yeah.
So I saw that you saw it. What do you think? Cyberpunk.
I mean, yeah.
aesthetics?
It's the quintessential cyberpunk aesthetic.
With no humans at all. There's no humans at all.
Yeah,
Robots.
just
It's just
robot
robots.
humans. Robot lives matter, Brian.
Yeah, I love cats, so obviously I'm gonna play it. I don't have a PS5 though, so I'm gonna have to get a PS5. With all the amount of exclusives that are coming out on the PS5, like, oh man, I've
There's
been
so many
really thinking
exclusives
about
coming out.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, what's the Xbox one called? Xbox Series X or something like that. Xbox One Series X. Is that it?
Fuck if I know, man.
Another one I wanted to
Xbox.
bring up
We
that I
don't
saw
know
on
how to
the-
name stuff. X.
You
Have you
brought
seen that meme? Have you seen that meme that's like Xbox Xbox One, Xbox One box, Xbox, Xbox box, Xbox One box, Xbox box.
360, 540.
It's like
You brought up Westworld earlier with Michael Crichton.
Yeah.
one Xbox.
Video
One
you
Xbox.
can have me watch, definitely put it down as a cyberpunk story. Would you say all three have held up? First of all, would you say it is in fact a cyberpunk story? Uses the themes correctly, and would you read the book, but the original show and the new show, have they held their end of the cyberpunkness?
Brian,
so
do
much.
you want to go into this before I do
Can
a
you ask the
long spiel?
question? Can you ask the question again? Here's the
Um,
here's the meme, Nick.
Are you
this is
discording it to me?
This is important.
Also, if you Discord it to me, I can't see because I can't move Discord without fucking everything
Oh,
up.
really?
Well, if I do, it's gonna mess up the
Oh.
stream.
Oh, I see. Okay, then I won't send it to you. I'm sorry.
That's okay. You can send it to me. I'm just gonna look at it later.
Oh man, it's relevant. Okay,
Question
go for it.
World, in fact, Cyberpunk, and going through its progression of book, the old show, the new show, the movie, the new show. Is it still Cyberpunk?
What was the show?
Westworld.
Oh, Westworld. Cyber You know what? That kind of that documentary kind of did talk about Westworld.
That's why I'm
That
bringing it up.
that yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't have the aesthetic of it because it has the aesthetic of
It
a western.
definitely has the aesthetic of it. Yeah. I mean, the
Does
only
it,
thing
though?
that it or
It's
it
got the
definitely sorry, I said the opposite of what I meant. It definitely has the feelings of it. It does
The
not
theme, yeah.
have the aesthetic. Yeah, it has the
Yeah.
theme is very prevalent, like where it's a dystopian society, and then there's rebellion against corporatism, right? I mean,
Yeah.
corporatism in this sense is like the host and the park itself. So it's like a very similar structure, um, very similar. You know, hits similar notes, but we're empathizing with the robots in this case, which the other film does. Does that as well, like the original uh, Blade Runner, which I keep calling back to the original, but because we haven't really talked that much about print stuff,
Yeah.
but do you see what I'm saying? I think that the the feelings are there, and maybe in the new season, I don't know. We'll have to see the new season. The next season. She like well, we have seen a little bit. We have seen a little bit of what's her name, Dolores in the real
in the real
world,
world.
and it's not really a
Yeah.
cyberpunk vibe.
No, it's not great. It's very real, modern.
But I think it
Most
does pull from like some cyberpunky elements and
which
stuff too, though. I
I
just
don't
don't
think
think
it
it
nailed.
like I think it pulls from like some minor aesthetics, but I think it like I don't know, it doesn't feel cyberpunk in the same way as like the Stray
I
Cat
agree.
game or like uh or Altered Carbon does. Also, the new season sucked.
Yeah.
But
I didn't even
yeah,
care for the first one that much.
I don't know. That's a hard one because it has
How
so
about
many of the
how
same
about this? How
themes, but
about
it has none
this?
of the aesthetic.
How about this? Not Bad Robot. Mr. Robot.
I was thinking about Mr. Robot a little bit, but no, I don't think
It's
that.
modern days. It's modern day, obviously, so it doesn't have the
That's a better
futuristic.
example of a take away, like Appleize it a little bit, evil core, economy. It does a better job of speaking to our current day climate. But aesthetic for me is the first part. And the
Well,
second part is
it's kind of interesting that like that's kind of like that evil corp thing is like reflection of his disease essentially. I mean, it sucks to call it a disease, but like his
His like mental
schizophrenia,
illness. Yeah.
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
It was again modern day, and I thought they did a wonderful show with that job. I loved it. But I feel like what I got from the documentary, and you guys will, give me your opinion on this or not, is that urge for technology, right? While there's hacking in there, really more a reflection of like our modern day society, not like if Mr. Robot like installed like a metal arm or like a chip in his brain, then you would start hitting more of what I understand to be.
Yeah.
I think the themes are there. I totally think the themes.
Yeah. You're right. It's not hitting the cybernetic enhancement, it's not hitting that type of stuff. It is in the now. It feels like something that could be happening right now. And so that is why it doesn't feel like dystopian future. It feels like dystopian now. It feels a little bit more like to me what those futuristic sci-fi films feel like, honestly, because they never make an effort to make you feel like you're in the future unless you're in space or something like that, right? Like when you're like what's inside the buildings of the Tom Cruise film that we're talking about.
Minority Report.
Yeah, Minority Report. It all essentially looks the same, right? There's not really
Yeah.
you're not there. You're not. I mean, obviously the cars look different,
Like,
and that's just a result of it being the future. But
they look through the memories and stuff. That seems kind of cyberpunky to me.
yeah,
That seems like I don't
but
know
I'm
if that seems
yeah,
cyberpunk. It seems like just like futuristic.
yeah, futuristic. It's like I mean, it is a little dystopian. Like no privacy. 1984, Big Brother's watching.
Yeah,
Which is
Minority Report feels like way
Orwellian.
more than 1984 than it is like a cyberpunk film to me.
Yeah.
But again,
Yeah, because it doesn't because like that's government versus corporatism.
corporate. Yeah.
Yeah.
But here's again the problem that we keep running into is like when we keep trying, like when you're trying to find cyberpunk more than just the aesthetic of neon light and high contrast, like we run into these issues because like again, like as you mentioned, like is Mr. Robot a cyberpunk film? It hits all the same themes. It like
It's a
okay,
themes.
so like Mr. Robot and Neuromancer are actually really fucking close when it comes to their story structure, plot, and themes and stuff. Like the way that they deal with like corporations and technology and everything. Now, granted, Neuromancer goes like several years into the future. It feels kind of matrixy, but if you just pull back the technology like 10 degrees,
Yeah.
you get Mr. Robot, and like
Yeah.
does that mean Mr. Robot's no longer a cyberpunk film, or because it's exploring the same themes is also a cyberpunk film just set in the modern era? Like let's say like a let's say Mr. Robot was made in the 1980s, right? And before anybody had any clear understanding of like how technology would have worked back then. You would probably say Mr. Robot's is a cyberpunk film, right? Because it's dealing with the technology in the future and it's dealing with the same like questions that most cyberpunk films are trying to analyze. But when we get to the modern aesthetic, it's not there. So here's the question: is cyberpunk the themes that it wants to explore, or cyberpunk the aesthetic?
I think that the themes that it wants to explore are a little bit too similar and prevalent in other media that makes similar commentary to just say that it's the themes.
So
Because
it must
you
be the
can make
aesthetic.
so it had no. I think it's the specific combination of the
Okay.
aesthetic and the themes. I think that when those are married together, it creates that you know that marriage of
I agree with that
you
because
know
especially breaking down the two words that make this thing up: cyber, high tech, new technology; punk, something to do with like metro city, like you
against the
know.
grain. Yeah,
Yeah, whether you got your morally ambiguous private eye, or you got your Mr. Robot, drug addict hacker kid, like he's got to be against the grain. He's got to be going up creek, right? It's not your Flash Gordon, right? So I totally agree with that, Brian.
it's that marriage. It's the aesthetic. I think that's what it's got to be,
I think
or at
that's a
least for
really
that
good.
vibe, for that combination, for it to feel like that. Not to create something different, but if you want to create that.
No, I think we've kind of hit on it. I think after an hour and a half of conversation, we finally figured out what cyberpunk means. No, but I think that's a really good point. I think that the marriage between the two, the aesthetic and the themes, is what you have to have for cyberpunk. That's such a really good point.
Yeah,
I
so
didn't even think about that.
basically, the greatest cyberpunk movie ever made, Cowboys and Aliens.
Basically, I mean, obviously.
Oh my god.
Let's
All right.
Dario. Let's be honest here. The greatest movie ever made. Okay.
film. It's actually called a film.
And
Oh,
on that
okay.
note, I think it's a good time for us to call it. This has been a very fruitful discussion of culture and film and media.
I would
And
wholeheartedly agree. So I'm going to go ahead and do the
Yeah.
sign off now.
Thank you for joining us, Dario. It's been like
man.
it's so cool to have like another person like and like you. I literally would not have we would not have had the discussion about the Tom Cruise film like if you didn't make us re-examine it. So that was it's
Yeah,
just nice
thanks
to
for
have
letting, like,
more heads to
jury.
bounce ideas off of. So
I think
more
it'll
brains.
help a lot of like, people that are checking out the podcast for a few times. It's like, I don't know. Like I texted my brother about it, like, check it out. And he's like, what's Cyberpunk? I was like, oh, I actually have a few legitimate definitions and examples to give you. On the other hand, I hit up an anime friend of mine who's like, yeah, we're going to be talking about Cyberpunk. And he's like, cool. That's dope. He's like the guy who introduced me to anime. So say things like Cyberpunk to film junkies or anime junkies, and they're like, yeah, I know the realm of these. That sounds interesting. So
I think
thank you guys for coming, and I'm excited to know what the next topic is we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
Granted, we don't know what the next topic is either, so we'll let you know though. But thank you guys both for coming in and joining us. I appreciate it greatly. I think we're going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you all for joining us, all three of you. But no, I hope to see you guys next week so we can talk about a whole new thing. Thank you, everyone.
All
And we are
right.
signing off.